So hello, Mr. Gulati. Can you hear us loud and clear?
Hi Anuj, yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Welcome to you. A big welcome. We were waiting for you. Great. So
I'm so sorry for getting late. So sorry to everybody.
great. So we were just, assuming you must be on a client call, closing an M&A deal. So there can be greater learnings for us without you disclosing any names or finer details which are part of the NDA. So friends, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Gulati. So let me just open up my uh, LinkedIn again. So here he is, as you can see, Mr. Ashish Gulati. He's the partner, deal advisory at KPMG India, and a few lines about him that we wrote on LinkedIn. So, friends, World Auto Forum is proud to present an authority on M&A deal advisory, an expert to whom CEOs, MDs, chairpersons turn to for advice and making M&A happen. So, friends, it's your time with Mr. Ashish Gulati, partner, deal advisory, KPMG India. So, Mr. Gulati, all yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anuj, for the kind words. What I'm going to do is that I am going to put up a presentation where I will share a few slides and we will talk through it. So just give me a moment. Okay, so while I'm sharing my screen, what I really wanted to do today was uh, share with you as to what is it that we are seeing at this point of time from an M&A perspective uh, for the auto businesses, because obviously this is fairly difficult time for a lot of these businesses, and since we have a deep experience in terms of talking to a lot of these companies, hopefully making some transactions happen, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to share a few slides with our perspectives on how we are seeing the market and the conversations that we are having with a lot of companies for the auto space. Um, I think Anuj, I will need your help. I'm not able to share my screen. It says only the host can share your screen. You'll have to possibly allow me to share my screen. Anuj, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can share now, Mr. Gulati. I've given.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Just give me a moment.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm just sharing my screen. Sharing my screen here. Are you able to see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So basically, what I wanted to do, like I mentioned, was that I wanted to share with all of you as to what is it that we are seeing from an auto perspective in terms of how deals will happen. What is it that we are hearing from various people? And I will also try and share with you in terms of how to structure some of these transactions. What is it that we're looking at? This is from that perspective a practical discussion, which I thought should be far more helpful as compared to sort of uh, to a theoretical discussion in that sense. So most of the deal making activity that is likely to happen for the auto sector will happen for the supplier ecosystem. Because at an OEM level, right, we don't think there is going to be a lot of activity because we already have a lot of these companies which are owned by international players. Some of the Indian players are there. Something may happen there, but I think from a volume perspective, most of the activity will happen for the supplier ecosystem. Now, for the entire supplier ecosystem that we have, we believe that the whole supplier ecosystem is something which can be categorized to four parts. The the first part, which is really consisting of people who are small sized, which means that they are ranging from a revenue of a 200 crores to a 500 crores. These are largely sort of a family-owned company. They don't have a long-term joint venture partner for technology stroke funding support. A lot of these companies, they run businesses which are a capital-intensive business, and a lot of the expansion which has been undertaken by them has been funded by bank debts, or in some situations, some non-core investments have been made. And from a leverage perspective, we have a lot of these companies which are going to be ranging from a long term, I mean, a debt to EBITDA between a 3:1 to, in some extreme situations, 6:1. What is likely to happen with a lot of these companies is that obviously from a demand perspective, it seems that the revival is likely to be fairly slow. A lot of these companies, because they are small in size, they will not be able to access from a capital perspective either debt capital or equity capital. Bankers are likely to ask for returning their money, and the financial ratios are likely to worsen. So what we are likely to see here is that there is going to be a consolidation where some of these smaller players are likely to be sold out to larger players, which would lead to deal activity, as I was mentioning. The second part of the supplier ecosystem consists of players which are, let's say, from a 500 crores to a 2000 crore revenue. Fundamentally, these businesses are decent from a profitability point of view, from an ROC point of view. And then a lot of them do not have a long-term joint venture partner for a technology stroke funding support. From a debt to EBITDA perspective, they are at this point of time ranging from a 2:1 to a 3:1, let's say 2.5:1, which means that purely as of now, right? Purely as of now, while they have some stress, this is not an extreme situation. But given the fact that the current year FY21 is likely to be a bad year, these financial ratios are likely to move very quickly from a 2:1 to a 4:1, 5:1 potentially. What we are likely to see here is that from a capital raising point of view, they may be able to raise some capital from a structured debt fund stroke a special situation fund. And some of them may also have to sell a part of their business because fact is, some of these guys, they have undertaken certain expansions funded by bank debt, which is like a non-core expansion. For example, two-wheeler supplier expanding to four-wheeler business, for example. Four-wheeler seems to be a non-core business. So we are also likely to see certain situations whereby some of these guys will want to sell some of their existing businesses which are non-core to them. For the rest, people who are not either able to raise external funding and are also not able to sell a part of their business, there is again likely to be a consolidation, which would mean that some of these players may get sold to larger players. The third sort of part is that where you have a core supplier, which is a large supplier, where from balance sheet perspective, they have good balance sheet, leverage is not an issue, they can survive the crisis. And they also have a long-term joint venture partner for a technology stroke of funding support. What is likely to happen is that for the players from the first bucket and the second bucket, who are likely to be sold, they are likely to be sold to the players who are in the third bucket. Fourth bucket is again a sort of fairly interesting situations, and these are large companies, but from a balance sheet perspective, they have a problem again, because again, a lot of capital expansion has been funded by debt. And based on some conversations that we've had with them now, they are open to invite a global joint venture partner, which would mean that joint venture will get formed with some of these companies. These joint venture partners can be Japanese companies or can be some other sort of geography. So I would say that from a supplier ecosystem perspective, these are broadly the four categories that we can look to sort of segregate the entire supplier ecosystem. The second interesting thing which I wanted to talk about was that from an investor's perspective, what is it that we are hearing? Because as I mentioned, some of these people will need to raise some capital. What we are hearing from a private equity fund, for example, is that the auto space at this point of time, because for FY21, people really don't have an idea regarding how much demand will come back. FY22, people are hoping that demand will come back. Given the fact that there is a lot of sort of uncertainty at this point of time, the private equity funds, they are saying that, look, we are not going to be willing to back companies which are in first bucket or in second bucket. The third bucket, which is consisting of largest suppliers and who are likely to be people who are going to be acquiring during this consolidation phase, these funds, they are saying that, okay, we are happy to have a conversation with the largest players. We are happy to provide them financing, and we are happy to partner with the promoters there to consolidate the supply chain. The second category which is there are players which is not a pure play fund, but which is a structured debt stroke a special situation fund. These people don't do equity deals. I mean, they would do structured debt, special situation sort of a transaction. What we are hearing from them is that, okay, they also think that companies which are falling within the first bucket, because of the fact that they are small, they don't want to do anything with them. They are, on the other hand, very open to have conversations with companies in second bucket, which are reasonably large in size, which from a business perspective, they have a business which is a decent business fundamentally. And because there is a problem from a capital structure point of view, they are open to finance some of these companies to rectify the capital structure. And they are open to look at transactions which is not going to be a pure play private equity deal like I mentioned, but is going to be a structured debt stroke a special situation. The way the structured debt will work is that based on the asset collateral, based on cash flow collaterals, based on share pledge, they would be providing financing to some of these companies, which can be used to replace a bank finance, because in bank finance, you have to pay to the banks on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, which in the current scenario can be a problem for some of the companies. The structured funds, they are open to look at flexibilities from a repayment perspective. They're open to look at flexibilities from an interest rate perspective, which means that they can charge a small interest rate to begin with. But after a 3-year time period, for example, they can have a structure whereby they can have a higher return. So situations like these where people have flexibility in terms of how the investment should be structured, they are very open to have conversations with companies which are falling within the second bucket and also within the third bucket, because obviously third bucket, these are larger players who want to consolidate. And a lot of these companies are likely to be interesting for these special situation funds. The third thing which I also want to talk about was from a Japanese company perspective, because for a lot of auto sector, right, Japan has been the main source of investments. And the thing which we are hearing these days from a Japanese company is that, look, because we also have to handle the situation which we have at a Japan level, they are saying that, look, we don't want to have a conversation with a new investment till about September 2020, because till that point of time for anyone to form a view on the market looks to be really difficult. So a lot of these companies, they are saying that, okay, we can possibly have a conversation sometime in the second half, which means that obviously because you're talking to a Japanese company, if you would start the conversation in second half, to consummate a transaction with them will take 18 months. So the transactions which are likely to happen in this space from a Japanese perspective, at least for the next 12 months, are likely to be few and far between. The other thing which we've also been hearing from a Japanese company is the fact that they don't want to make an investment into a traditional business, which means they are not very keen to invest into a traditional forging, machining, casting, plastic businesses. They don't want to get into any of that. They are saying that we want to have investments into companies which have a new technology element to it, which would mean that it should have some EV play, it can have an ADAS play, it can have some technology play, and so on and so forth. What we are also seeing in the market is that in some of the situations where there are joint ventures which have been formed historically with Japanese companies, there are some inter-se discussions which are happening with the players whereby there may be some stake exchange which may happen between the Japanese company with the Indian company. For example, there might be a joint venture, which is a 50-50 joint venture. And now the Japanese company is saying that, look, I want to increase my shareholding from 50% to 60%, 70%, potentially even 100%. So some of those conversations, I think they're happening. So in the current scenario, therefore, right, because of the fact that for the auto sector, like I mentioned, this is probably probably the worst possible time from a deal making perspective for the last 10, 12 years, right? What is it, I mean, that we're hearing in terms of the buyers thinking and in terms of the sellers thinking? So the buyers are essentially saying, buyers stroke investors, they're essentially saying that, look, because of the fact that now COVID has happened, valuations have to significantly go down. They are also saying that for targets where there is a leverage, the bankers have to take a haircut. The buyers are also saying that, look, from a multiple perspective, the multiple should be linked to FY21 and should not be linked to FY20, because FY20 is gone. That was a different time period. World has completely changed. Then in addition to that, some of the buyers are saying that, look, we have the option to acquire this asset now. We also have the option that we should not do the deal now. We can wait for the asset to become so stressed that it has to go to NCLT. Remember that at this point of time, for a 12-month time period, right, there will be no NCLT filing largely because of the fact that IBC has been postponed. Some of the buyers are also saying that, look, at this point of time, because the valuations are cheaper, we want to acquire 100%. We don't want to have a situation where the sellers has a minority shareholder, because this is like an opportunistic time for buyers, people who've got the money. From an investor point of view, factors that they are asking that, look, okay, we can have an investment at this point in time, but how will the exit happen? Because for some of the family-owned companies which are not listed, right, for a private equity investor to come in, structured debt investor to come in, some exit has to happen. So a lot of questions are being asked in terms of how the exits will happen. Also, from a structured debt perspective, like I said, because the approach at this point of time seems to be a risk-averse approach, they are saying that we want to have asset collaterals, we want to have share pledges, we want to have a buyback guarantee for a promoter, and so on and so forth. So therefore, in that sense, obviously, because the buyers have become both risk averse plus opportunistic, we are hearing some of these things purely from a buyer's perspective. As compared to that, the things which are hearing from a seller's point of view, right? The sellers are saying that, look, this whole thing which has happened, this is a temporary phenomena. The long-term story for the auto industry in India continues to remain fairly bullish. And therefore, from a valuation perspective, there should not be too much of a hit because this market will come back within 6 months. The banks, at least at this point of time, because of the fact that the NCLT has been closed, the banks are not open to take haircuts. And I think especially from a PSU bank perspective, nobody wants to take a haircut. From a deal structure plus a valuation point of view, the sellers are saying that, look, for us to do a deal based on FY21 numbers doesn't make sense, because for anyone to be able to forecast what the FY21 sort of a number would be, right, nobody has got any idea. And therefore, sellers are saying that, look, we have to link the transaction value to the FY20 number, which is an achieved number, which is a delivered number. And then we should look at structuring options whereby there can be an upward stroke or downward adjustment to valuation based on how FY22 and 23 numbers actually pan out. The sellers, because of the fact that they realize that at this point of time, the valuations have gone down, rather than looking to do a 100% transaction, they are saying that, okay, we want to retain some 30%, 40% shareholding, which can then be sold 4 or 5 years down the line when the market comes back. From a structured fund perspective, I think the sellers will become more open to agree to a higher collateral and to have structures whereby clawbacks can happen when market returns have come to normal. So as you would see, right, the thinking which the buyers have and which the sellers have in terms of how they're looking to approach the market and in terms of how they're looking to structure the transaction, that is completely different. The buyers, because of the fact that they are seeing this as an opportunity for them to acquire assets cheap, They are obviously saying that the valuations have to go down, the sellers have to take haircuts. We want to do the deals based on FY20 numbers. FY21 numbers, not 20 numbers, and they want to acquire 100%. The sellers are saying to the contrary, that I mean, the downturn seems to be a short-term downturn, and long-term story seems very good. We will not take too much haircuts, and in case we have to take haircuts, we want to retain a certain shareholding, which can then be sold at a later point of time. So therefore, the important thing here is that because the approach of the buyers and sellers is so different at this point of time, from a structuring perspective, then how do you make the transactions happen? Because at the end of it, deals have to happen when the deal is going to be equally okay to buyer and the seller. So what we are therefore seeing in the marketplace, what we are trying to do with our clients is to say that, see, to make a transaction happen based on the FY21 numbers is going to be completely impossible, because FY21, like I mentioned a short while back, nobody knows what the number will be. So the solution therefore has to be that, okay, the deal has to be done based on the FY20 number. The seller has to accept that from a multiple perspective, he will have to take a haircut. So he will not be getting the same multiple which he was getting 1 year back. So the seller will have to take a haircut from a multiple perspective. From a buyer's perspective, he will have to agree that the multiple will be applied to the FY20 actual delivered number. And then we have some structure based on earnout, based on some clawback, whereby based on the actual financial sort of numbers which are there in FY22, 23, when the market hopefully will come back, there can be some adjustment to valuation. This is the way to find a bridge between the thinking at this point in time which the buyers have and which the sellers have. And which would mean that, yes, the sellers at this point of time, from an upfront valuation perspective, they will have to take a haircut, but then they can recoup the valuation based on the numbers which are going to be, let's say, FY22 and FY23. We are also saying to everybody, right, to the buyers, to the seller, that NCLT is not going to be a solution for either of you, because after the asset goes into NCLT, from a continuity perspective, right, from a business continuity perspective, there will always be a challenge. So a buyer may be able to obtain the business from NCLT cheaper, but what is likely to happen is that after a business reaches NCLT, because to take the business out from NCLT will take you at least a 9 to 12 months time period, right? But by that time, from a customer perspective, business is fairly likely would have been shifted to somebody else. So from an NCLT point of view, you can acquire assets cheap, but if you want to really acquire a running business, NCLT is not the solution. We are also saying to sellers that in case you want to raise structured funding, then you will have to agree to higher collaterals, because the investors are taking a risk-averse approach here. From a banker's perspective, what we're also seeing is that while a PSU bank is saying that, okay, we will not take any haircuts, from a private bank's perspective, there seems to be an openness to at least take some reasonable haircuts. Because I think from a private bank's perspective, they are in some sense seeing the writing on the wall that if they don't take a reasonable haircut at this point of time, then 6 to 12 months down the line, they may have to take a deeper haircut. So private banks seem to be a little more amenable to take haircuts rather than PSU banks. And from a seller's perspective, we are saying that, look, wherever it is a possibility, you should look at a structured deal. You should not do a pure play equity deal, because in a pure play equity deal, the dilution which the seller will suffer will be a lot more. For a structured debt transaction, assuming the business comes back in FY23, for example, you would have a situation whereby you can protect equity dilution. So therefore, from a structuring perspective, these are some tools which we are applying as at this point of time to see as to how we can find a solution which is a win-win solution, both from a buyer's perspective plus from a seller's perspective. So I would say this is a summary from my side, where I have tried to cover the real-time situation which we are seeing on ground from a business perspective, and also the real-time situation in terms of what the buyers are saying, in terms of what the sellers are saying, and how we are trying to solve some issues from a deal structuring sort of perspective here. Happy to have any suggestion, comments, or some questions. Happy to answer any of that.
Great. So fantastic. I think it was a great presentation, and we can see that there is this game going on between the buyers and the sellers. Both pulling each other from the opposite end. One says follow FY20, the other says follow FY21. So, friends, any questions for our expert of deal advisory in the house, Mr. Gulati? If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. You want to ask any questions on, is this the right time to raise money, or what should be your approach or strategy? How can you keep your business afloat? He's the man. You don't get to talk to him so often. Please feel free. So no questions. So we assume that everybody is crystal in their understanding and conception. All right. So Mr. Gulati, before you leave, any piece of advice you like to give to entrepreneurs? These challenging times. Best way to manage their cash flows. What would it be?
So I would say as follows, Anuj. I think that's a valid question. Very, very good question. I think from the experience that people have had at this point in time, right, people have realized that the capital structure for any business has to be a sustainable capital structure. For a lot of these situations that we are seeing, because let's say from an FY16 to an FY19, the auto sector really went through a boom, and people were expecting that even from a medium to a long-term perspective, this boom will continue, which is why a lot of sort of capacity expansion which has happened has been funded by debt. And when you have a down cycle like this, and when you have a leverage issue, then you really don't have too much of a choice. So I think the single most important thing which a lot of people have realized is that for an auto business, which will always be a capital intensive business, you have to always have a capital structure which has to be a balanced capital structure. Too much of a leverage from a capital structure perspective has been the killer in the downturn. So I would say that I think that's the single most important thing which people have realized. And to all my friends here, to entrepreneurs, I think the second piece of advice which I would give is, which is what we're hearing from a lot of our clients, is that there is a lot of focus from a cost optimization, cost rationalization perspective. Because apart from raising capital, which for a leverage situation, you will have to raise capital at some point in time, right? Apart from raising capital, there is a lot of focus which is there from a cost optimization perspective, reduce the fixed cost. That's the single most important mantra which is there at this point in time for everybody, including us as well. So wherever it is a possibility to reduce cost, to optimize cost, I think that has to be the single most important agenda items.
Surely. So we have one question by Mr. Neeraj Bandhu. He works with this company called Autotech. So Neeraj, please feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, Mr. Ashish, you had mentioned that the Japanese companies are not looking at the traditional business, but looking at opportunities in the new business models or the new tech space. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what kind of areas are they now looking at in the new tech space?
So I would say as follows, Neeraj. I think purely from a historical perspective, let me contextualize this. I think in the time frame of, let's say, 2005 to about 2015-16, that 10-year period, right? The moment you go to a Japanese company, talk about an investment in India, Suzuki being a big supplier, growing Suzuki wants you to come to India, right? We were seeing a lot of openness from all these companies to come. Post 2015-16, because of the fact that at a global level, from a technology perspective, significant changes are happening. From an IC engine to sort of EV, and again, from an ADAS perspective, big changes happening, battery technology coming in, so on and so forth, ECU technology coming in. A lot of these companies, I mean, they're saying that we are open to come to India, we want to come to India, but we would want to invest into businesses which would have context from a global perspective. The days when you would have a Japanese company looking to come to India to invest into a forging, casting, machining, those days are gone. So a lot of these Japanese companies, to answer your question specifically, what they're saying is that if you have an asset which has a battery technology to it, if you have if you have an asset which has got an EV element to it, if you have an asset which has got an ADAS element to it, if you have an asset which has got an electronic element to it. So for all the new stuff which is coming, connected cars, electronics, ADAS, EVs, batteries, right? They're still keen. But historical traditional businesses, a lot of these companies, they're saying, look, they are not very keen to invest.
Fair enough. So we are almost out of time. So one last question by Mr. Arun Gupta, and then we'll wrap up this keynote.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Gupta, please feel free to.
Sir, good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge Mr. Ashish Gulati for a very well-designed presentation where he had made the buckets and what the funds and all that are thinking. So my sir question is, you have made three things: PE funds or structured debt and Japanese companies. So do you think that in merger and acquisition space, Japanese are looking at India in a big way in a merger and acquisition? And suppose we are manufacturing some self-adhesive pastes which are like newish technology, and they are very good to be used in electric vehicle and also in many type of batteries and like that. But we don't have that technology. So should we go for to contact with the Japanese company? We can share with them our willingness. Will it help for some joint venture or maybe acquisition or something, equity participation?
So I would say, Arunji, I mean, the fact that you have something related to EVs, batteries, for example, like you mentioned, you may not have the technology, that's fine. But the fact that you have got something to do with EVs, right? If you're able to reach out to a right Japanese company, from an interest perspective, you will definitely get interest, because as I mentioned, some of these companies, they want to make investments, they want to help entrepreneurs like yourself from a new technology perspective. So therefore, in that sense, so long as you're able to showcase the fact that you are not a traditional automotive component company in that sense, but you are a company which can help the Japanese company to expand from an EV ecosystem perspective here in India, they will definitely be interested.
So, sir, we can send them mail or like that, or introducing, or what should be the best way to have a dialogue with a Japanese company, or should we go through a PE or something like that, or some consultant?
So I would say, Arunji, for that, if you were to send a mail to a Japanese company, the probability for you to get a response will be like really, really low. You won't get any answer. I think the best way would be that you would have to find an intermediary, whatever that right intermediary would be. You would have to find an intermediary who is going to be able to talk to the Japanese company, to go to meet them face to face and so on and so forth. Because in Japanese culture, that is very important. What we've seen with some of these companies is that they normally have, sort of Japanese consultant, right? Who would be a local Japanese guy sitting within Tokyo, yeah, here in India as well, right? Because unless and until you have a Japanese guy going and talking to a Japanese company, you won't get too much of an answer.
Okay, great. So friends, okay, thank you so much, Arunji, for that question. And okay, so one last question. I think Mr. Gogia had asked one question. This will be the last and final question. Mr. Siddhant, are you there? I can't see you in the list. You had asked a question, but now suddenly you are missing. Okay, so fair enough. I think I can't see him here right now. So friends, that's it for this session. So Mr. Gogia, if you can hear this, if you have this question later on, we can take it later on. You can just put in the comments and Mr. Gulati can answer later on. And plus also because of the time. So thank you so much, Mr. Gulati. Really appreciate your session. And
okay, thank you very much.
Really humbled and honored to have you, for you to take out your time on a Saturday morning. So friends, please share your feedbacks on Mr. Gulati's session by just putting in the chat how you found the session. And thank you so much, Mr. Gulati. Have a great Saturday. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.